So good morning, everyone. It's been a terrific conference. First, I'd like to thank both Ned and Mary for putting on this wonderful conference. Great discussions, great energy around media and the impact of digital, which is so profound across so many industries. I'm here. I have the privilege of interviewing or discussing the state of the video game industry with Peter Moore, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Electronic Arts. Just a word about me before I introduce Peter is I have the privilege of running the Entertainment Software Association, which is the trade association for the video game industry. It includes Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, EA, Ubisoft, Take-Two, Warner Brothers Entertainment, and about 40 total members. And we put on E3, which will be here in several months, and handle advocacy and a variety of other issues. I've known Peter for years, and he's been a terrific leader within the industry. Peter's background is, as many of you know, he has experience at Sega, where he worked on Dreamcast, at Xbox, where he was around for the launch of the original Xbox and the Xbox 360 and ran those programs. And then he came to EA in 2007 and is initially focused on just sports and now is purview over the entire company and is the Chief Operating Officer. So, Peter, we're delighted to have you here.
My pleasure, Mike.
A few thoughts just to kind of lay the groundwork about digital in video games. And Peter's company is a tentpole within that, but let's share some of the larger numbers and set the table. First of all is we have incredible demand as an industry, whether by any metric, whether it's number of consumers per month, number of consumers per day, or by revenue or by platform. Wherever you go, wherever there's a screen, you have video games as one of the very top applications that are being used, and increasingly today, that is a digital exercise. A few statistics. Apple announced just a month ago that they had done $2 billion in sales in the App Store. $10 billion in sales in the App Store in 2013. Of that, 8 of the top 10 games, 8 of the top 10 apps were video games. 63% of the revenue came from video games. So one of the dominant platforms. Another source indicates that video games are the #1 selling product on all 3 of the largest digital platforms, which would be iOS, Android, and Amazon. So enormous presence, enormous numbers there. Look at Riot Games. Riot's very successful, very young company. 27 million players play Riot Games in a day, 27 million a day. And when you look at digital sales in the United States, last year they were $11.7 billion. So this is a big industry, it's a big footprint. PricewaterhouseCoopers says 2 very important things about digital. One, that within 2 years, over 50% of the revenue in the video game industry will be digital, and that the fastest growing segment of that is mobile. So Peter, what does this mean for gamers, game makers, this transition to digital? What does it mean for all the aspects of the industry?
Well, I think what digital is doing for us, and let's take a step back and let's define digital first of all, which I think is always important. Digital for us, certainly in our industry, is any content that's delivered directly to a consumer's device, hard drive, rather than through physical media. That could be downloadable content, microtransactions, even in-game advertising. It's the digitization of our industry. I think it's about choice. We all went through this with music, and we can talk about that. We've started to go through it now with movies. Where we're looking at, do you want to get the Blu-ray disc or do you want to stream it if it's available on Netflix? We're seeing it in games, and it's a slow start. A couple of reasons. Our file size in games are huge. A AAA game now on next-gen consoles could be 6 to 8 gigabytes. So it's not an inconsequential download, and there's a time factor. It's going to take you a little while to download those 6 gigabytes, so you don't have this instant gratification of popping a disc in and the plug and play, as we used to call it in games. Secondarily, and it's primarily a North American phenomenon, gamers still like the idea of owning physical media. Why? Because there is a residual equity value of the used game market. There is a multi-billion-dollar business in this country, primarily driven by our great partners at GameStop, that has, first of all, kept our frontline pricing very healthy as an industry. And secondarily, I think a consumer goes into this $60 game and sees a $40 investment or even a $30 investment because they see equity in that. So that slows down a little bit of the growth of digital in gaming because there's still a very, very healthy secondary market for that. And then thirdly, there's this interesting phenomenon when I talk to a lot of gamers that they just like to have things on the shelf. And it's when you and I were collecting records, for those of us remember vinyl, the ability to show things, you know, and put them on the shelf and pull them down and show your friends is an interesting phenomenon that I see that sits pretty close to the surface of the psyche of gamers. Just like to have things there. So the convenience that we see that is digital, and we are seeing this now with the new hardware, and obviously in the previous panel, we talked a lot about that. Download speeds are increasing. Hard drives, when I was running the Xbox business, it was a 4 gigabyte hard drive. Now we're looking at 500 gigabytes, and we're getting very close to terabytes now and delivering that. And I've done both. I played games on disk, and then this past weekend we had a little game called Titanfall, and I and many gamers downloaded a 4.6 gigabyte beta because the only way to get it, and played it via my hard drive in that respect. So it truly is about choice, and we're going to see a very interesting couple of years. And then just to finish it as regards EA, we as a company a number of years ago, in fact, when I left Microsoft, the first ever meeting I had, and I've told you this story before, John Riccatello called it the burning platform meeting. And basically we went to New York and we realized that this industry was at a crossroads. And that the ability for us to be able, as a company, to transition from being kind of a Hollywood studio, blockbuster studio, delivering only physical media, AAA games, to the company we are today, trailing $1.7 billion of digital revenue. We were doing less than 200 when I arrived in 2007. And the diversification of our offerings, not only the games, but the experiences. Martin talked about companion apps, which we have for just about all of our games. So the idea of a burning platform, if you're not familiar, and I think most of us are, is you're, imagine, stood in the North Sea and the oil rig's on fire and you've got two choices. Yeah. You either stay there, and eventually you can hang out there for a while, but you know what's going to happen, or you take a leap into the North Sea. Yep, there's oil slicks on fire, there may be some sharks in there, but you're going to take matters into your own hands. We chose to take matters into our own hands. We spend about $1 billion a year in R&D, and we remixed that R&D over the last 4 or 5 years to be the much more diverse company we are today.
Well, and let's break down into pieces what you addressed in that initial answer, and let's focus on the new consoles. $1.37 billion in hardware sales in December. Both the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4 did 1 million units on day one, over 3 million units over the course of the holiday selling season. Console gaming was $25 billion in 2012, projected to go to $31 billion in the next 3 or 4 years. How's EA doing within console gaming, and that burning platform, are we in a different place now?
Well, I think we are. I started 2013 pre-E3, actually going into E3 worried. I was worried for the future of a dedicated box that sat next to your television that was going to deliver games. With the growth of mobile in particular, we had so much more choice as gamers now. The question we had as an industry was, would these consoles take off? Would they sell to the levels that you're at? I left E3, got on a plane at LAX feeling so much more comfortable. I thought Microsoft and Sony did a tremendous job at E3. It was all about the games, which is important. And I think this is, like Martin, this is my third transition that I've gone through. The numbers are staggering, and what you quoted, of course, has been updated by Sony this week with 5.3 million. On our earnings call a quarter ago, I felt that 10 million sold through would be an incredible achievement in next-gen hardware by March 31st. I undershot it. It feels like it's going to be 11 or 12, and I think we're in great shape at the end of calendar 14 to look at an install base of about 20 million combined PlayStation 4s and Xbox Ones.
And that stacks up historically. How does that measure up?
Well, the interesting phenomenon we've had in this transition is the first time 2 consoles have been shipped, almost concurrently within 10 days of each other. If you recall, there was 7 or 8 months between the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and then prior to that, my dearly beloved Dreamcast shipped out before the PS2, and we all know what happened there. But the ability for us as an industry to coalesce around 2 consoles, this has never been done before. But what I think we're seeing now is a tremendous competitive environment. I love it because we're a third party that benefits when you've got two very powerful multinational companies who are focused on interactive entertainment as one of their leading edge entrees into the living room in both Sony and Microsoft. And then secondarily, I think the experiences that they're now delivering, and I've got both. Yes, they're both great games machines, but boy, you know, the ability for me to use it for Netflix, I do enjoy Connect. I'm walking in and just saying Xbox on because it's so inconvenient to have to press a button nowadays. And I find that interesting, and I think the PS4 is a tremendous machine as well. So when I think of the future here, when I look at what our projections are as a company, and then the industry projections, I think we're in great shape.
And then in particular for EA, you guys hit a milestone last quarter in the volume that you're enjoying on those two machines. What was the share you guys reported?
We are 43% market share, 43% market share on the PlayStation 4, and we're about 30% market share on the Xbox One. So you can just about add up just about everybody else in 3 or 4 places below us. We had a strategy 2 years ago, which we called Let's Nail This Transition. As a company, we did a brilliant job during the PlayStation 2 era. Not so well during the PlayStation 3 era. The Wii complicated things for third-party developers. Do we go? Do we not go? But we were very, very focused on making sure we had our top franchises, our FIFAs, our Battlefields, our Maddens, ready to go on day one for both the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And we were there, and we're the #1 publisher in the world on both.
Well, certainly a strong start for you on those platforms. Now, looking back at digital, 2 years ago, EA, for the first time, crested $1 billion in digital revenue. Last quarter, you reported $125 million in digital revenue, and that was up 26% year over year. You frequently talk when you're in forums like this about the day when digital is going to outsell physical, and we heard some of that on the last panel. What are the lessons learned? You mentioned this in your first answer. What are the lessons that EA has learned from movies and music and even books when it comes to this transition?
Well, we'll take music first, and I think the first lesson we learned is don't sue your consumer, which those of us that were around during those days when a young man called Sean Fanning was in Hull, Massachusetts, and wrote some code one night because he was just fed up with the way that the music industry was treating him as a consumer, refusing to unbundle the content, charging $16.99 for a piece of plastic, 2 tracks of which you wanted and 10 that you had to buy. And that threw the industry into mass confusion, basically. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I remember Lars Ulrich and the guys from Metallica marching up to City Hall because they're going to sue some grandmother in Minneapolis for downloading Liberace music directly through Napster or LimeWire or Kazaa, if anybody remember those. And it took Steve Jobs, to be fair, to come in and say, we're going to clean this up. And we are going to show you, the industry, who refused to embrace creative destruction. They just stood there and said, we're not going to budge. We're going to be right. We're not going to change our business model because it's worked for us so many times. And as we've seen over and over again, once the consumer gets a head of steam behind him or her and they have some technology to back that up, there's nothing an industry can do. You can stand there and pretend that you can force the consumer to adopt your business model because it suits you. It doesn't happen. We saw that. The iPod came out very soon thereafter, iTunes. You had a vertical experience of getting your music on a device and taking that device with you anywhere you went. And we take it for granted now, but in those days, 10 years ago, it was quite dramatic. And then, of course, and the music industry has never, ever recovered from that. It's not about selling music anymore because there's no profit in that. It's about artists doing corporate gigs and selling merchandise. Movies have been a little bit more progressive. I think we're all streaming now, but movies had the benefit, as we have in interactive entertainment, of a pretty large file size. So it wasn't that easy as it was with music, 4 megabytes, to download movies. But we're seeing streaming, and you're seeing all the numbers this week of what Netflix is doing to the internet, second only to, it seems, Twitch TV as well, which we can talk about. But the ability for us now to be able to enjoy any movie, any given time, not have to drive to Blockbuster, not have to get there on a Friday, if you remember, at 6 o'clock and get in line for the new releases coming in on that shelf on the left.
And then return that thing by 9 p.m.
You better, because you got $50 late charges and the whole thing. And you know, Reed Hastings decided that that was the one thing that really annoyed it. It was the late charges more than anything else. Games in our world, we still have a little bit of a hybrid. Our company looks at digital and physical. I think 2 years from now we can squint and see digital overtaking. I think mobile will do that for us. We've embraced digital distribution by building out our own platform, which we call EADP. We look less now at selling what we call launch and leave or fire and forget. Most of our games are live operations games, 365 days a year. Massive amount of infrastructure goes underneath that to make them hopefully stay up 100% of the time. Global billing systems, massive customer service operations around the world. We're a very different company than we were when I joined in 2007.
And taking the parts of that answer and fusing them together, you have this change in technology and the notion that in your pocket you have a computer that's so very powerful and it's connected at very high speed, certainly relative to history. More to come on that. You have tablets. You have the consoles, which we've already talked about. And the example that I use when I talk about the country, go around the country and I talk about this industry, is FIFA soccer. And FIFA 2013, for those of you that don't know, 7.4 million discs sold. That used to be where the industry started and ended the conversation. But the things that's so transformational, 86 million fans, 51 countries, 18 languages, 13 platforms. So when you talk about EA,
every year,
that's right, year in and year out. And so when we think about that as an industry, I look at our industry versus motion pictures or music. You look at how quickly this transition's been made. You look at this opportunity that comes from the consumers redefining the experience, and then the need for the industry to rapidly adapt and empower that and then monetize it. What do you see in mobile? How does mobile fit in at EA in the strategy and this pantheon of reaching consumers on a title like FIFA? How does that fit in?
If nailing the transition in next-gen hardware is strategy job one, mobile is job 1A. We have invested heavily in mobile over the last 3 years. We've made some very good investments in small developers that are turning out tremendous games for us. We will continue to do so. We formed a division under Frank Gibeau, who you know, that is completely focused now on developing and publishing our mobile games. We're proud to be and have been for many quarters the #1 publisher in the world of games on the iOS platform. We literally have hundreds of games on iOS. Android, again, the brilliance of what's going on in mobile, which wasn't there 3 years ago, is it's the Sony and Microsoft, which we enjoy as a third party, continuing to invest to compete with each other and growing the business. 3, 4 years ago, our good friends at Apple really didn't have any competition. Then the Android platforms come along, particularly on a global basis because we deliver our content globally. And now you've got 2 other behemoths in Apple and Google going at it with games at the epicenter. And so Google Play, the App Store, all of which, to your earlier point, are driven by games now, becomes a very important inflection point for their adoption of their platforms. And we're seeing that certainly with our business here, and mobile continues to be a very important part of what we do.
So let's touch on another aspect where, again, it doesn't happen without digital. Live gaming, and then downloads of games. You mentioned the size of Titanfall as a download. What's happened with EA with respect to live connections with consumers and then those downloads?
We touch, or they touch us, I guess, about 300 million people a month that play an EA game. A mobile game, a game like Battlefield, a game like FIFA. There's 2 million people playing FIFA right now, somewhere in the world. You add that together with our PC games, our Asia expansion, FIFA Online in Korea, #2 game, not just sports game, the #2 game in the Korean market. And we have the benefit of having the FIFA franchise and being the leader in soccer and one of the few pieces of intellectual property that is truly global, obviously. But you know, our ability to be able to continue to grow this business is going to be important, and mobile will be that way. Building platforms underneath that support that, the live operations, is a relatively recent phenomenon. It's something that companies like ourselves have to do to scale. And it is not inexpensive. It is non-trivial work. And we've invested literally hundreds of millions each year over the last 4 or 5 years to build this platform. We call it Nucleus. It's database driven. You have an origin ID. It helps us serve you from a customer service perspective. It ties you to the community seamlessly, and it helps us commercially transact with you. And that was a great investment this company made 3 years ago and will continue to pay dividends for us. And it makes the gamer's experience that much easier.
You know, it's fascinating because my background originally was in networks and in the pipes that drive the internet. And you would only see NOCs, or network operations centers, with the larger telecommunications and cable companies. And you'd go in and they have the usual array of news channels and then the indicator screens of what's going on in their networks. If you go into Electronic Arts and you go to Peter's, outside Peter's office, they have the same thing for each game. And it rolls through and updates the number of players, where they are. It has all the diagnostics displayed. It's really remarkable, the transition that you guys have made.
That's who we have to be as a company. What Mike's referring to is a screen about as big as this that looks at every one of our franchises in real time, is pulling server data down, how many PSUs we got on what platform, do we have issues, what is our uptime, what are the customer service centers around the world saying, because they're the leading indicators of any issues, what our Metacritic rating is, what our Net Promoter Score that morning is on the game. And again, this is a company that as recently as 6-7 years ago made a game, shipped it, dev team went to the beach for 2 weeks, rinse and repeat. It's no longer the case. Completely different industry.
Now, when it comes to building those touch points where you're getting that data, it's a global network, isn't it?
Absolutely. Data centers around the world. Look, gamers deserve and want and pay for always on. They want the network always up. They want their servers and their matchmaking lobbies to be there. And they deserve that, paying handsomely for this. They pay for add-on content that needs to be available to them. You use FIFA, and we can talk about FIFA Ultimate Team, I think is the gold standard for digital content in our industry. And they deserve nothing less. And it's our job, if we're going to be a leading-edge digital company, to provide that. This is plumbing the gamers never see. You turn your Xbox on, you want to play a game, a Titanfall coming soon, for example, or a Battlefield, 32 versus 32, at 60 frames a second.
You had that at E3 2 years ago. That was fun.
I mean, it's not a small undertaking by any means. And is it perfect? No. We're still learning a lot about what that takes. But from the perspective of being able to deliver that, that is the expectation of gamers today, and that's what we need to provide for them.
It's interesting when I see your network display and what you have there, and then you look at what Xbox revealed at E3 last year for Xbox One, the series of, I think, 350 server farms around the country. What went through my mind was Skynet.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's funny, we go back to, you know, when I first got into this industry, I came from Reebok and knew really very little about the video game industry. And the Dreamcast, for those of you old enough to remember, was the first online console, albeit through dial-up. And the experience that we had in those days was waiting for the phone to connect. And somehow we managed to have a 24 frames per second experience over a 56K baud modem and figured out how to make it work with minimum lag. We've come a long way since then. I mean, I was playing the Titanfall beta on Sunday. It was just unbelievable. The lack of any latency whatsoever, which you needed in a game of that nature. Gamers absolutely loving it. But that is the price of entry in our industry now if you want to be a player.
All right, so you're a sports guy.
Yes.
Ultimate, Madden Ultimate NHL, FIFA. Tell us about that. What was the thinking behind it, and then what's the results you've seen?
So when I came to EA, the job that lured me to the EA was president of EA Sports, which seemed like a dream. Again, I just mentioned that I came from Reebok, so I had 17 years in sporting goods and sports marketing before coming to the video game industry. And the one job that would lure me away, other than the weather, from Redmond, Washington, would be president of EA Sports. John Riccatello had come back to EA, formed what we call the labels, and said, we want you, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, full P&L responsibility, build this brand, build these franchises, and continue to move us forward in this iterative, it's a tough business, every year delivering great sports experiences. 2 years into that, I wandered in, we build FIFA in Vancouver. We have a superb campus up in Burnaby, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And here's how these things evolve. Wandered into a guy's cube, he said, can I show you something? I've got a great idea that ties into this world of fantasy that we all have about our teams. And we're one of the biggest sports licenses in the world as a licensee. And we pay a lot of money.
It's in the game.
It is in the game. And it's not cheap to be in the game at times either. And this guy, I always remember, had this idea drawn on a whiteboard. He called it UT, Ultimate Team. And the idea, I'm from Liverpool, that my team our license doesn't allow us to do other than the Liverpool team. But what if we had a mode that would allow a Manchester United player or a Barcelona player or a Real Madrid player to put on the Liverpool kit or play in their own kits and have my ultimate team? True fantasy. And we needed to build it out, and we felt that there was a great experience that would make the game feel like a 365-day-a-year experience, which is what soccer is today. I mean, we're in a World Cup year. If you're in a World Cup squad, you're going to be lucky to get 4 days to go back, change your clothes when your league finishes, and you better be in Brazil ready for training camp in late May, early June. And we have the benefit of that because we're the exclusive licensee of FIFA, and we will have a World Cup game as well. But the idea of building this live operation, now we have approximately about 40 people who just focus on this mode called Ultimate Team, FIFA Ultimate Team, tapping into the passion of the game of soccer, what's going on in the transfer market, what happened yesterday in Champions League, Bayern Munich beating Arsenal, Barcelona beating Manchester City, what goes on this weekend in the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, Ligue 1, Serie A. We've tied into that. We've tapped into that passion.
Are you working on this team?
Just a lad from Liverpool here. I wish. A lot easier than what I do. And that's what Ultimate Team is. And look, there's a commercial transaction environment in which you get digital trading cards, and you get gold packs, you get silver packs, and bronze packs. And kids love it.
And what are the platforms you play Ultimate Team on?
Just about anything at this point, but primarily the console hardware. You can actually interact on the web with what we call foot web, in which you can be on the bus going to school or going to work and interacting with it and actually making transactions or moving your team around, which you then save up to the server. And when you go home to play on your Xbox or your PlayStation, that team is saved and ready to go. Long story short, we do about $200 million plus a year in the mode, not the game, in the mode. Gamers love it, and that's the important thing. This is not nickel and diming anybody. We have a lot of people behind it. We have a lot of investment to keep it up and keep it running, and it makes the game of FIFA 14 in this particular instance a non-stop living organism, rather than a game you play offline or a game you play with the guy on the couch next to you.
So focusing on the gamer, which I really think is a very high hallmark for our industry, is we live and die by the gamer. And those companies and those game experiences that are rich for the gamer, focused on that, are very successful. Can you explain what the role of a community manager is at EA, and what difference do they make in the success of a title?
So about 5, 6 years ago, we were starting to see the trend away from marketing, which is not a phrase we use much anymore, because the message that we wanted to deliver was clearly out of our hands. Gamers in particular have the platforms, have the passion, have the anger at times to tell us what they think, tell us what they need, and it's incumbent upon us as a company that puts the gamer first to deliver against that. So instead of doing big TV campaigns, and we still do television, you'll still see FIFA ads and Battlefield ads and Madden ads, but we started to invest in a job title called Community Manager. Young, mid-20s guys who knew nothing but interacting through social media, that knew the game backwards, that had a personality that interact, that had sympathy and empathy for problems, and managed both our outbound communications as well as the inbound feedback, I'll call it, that we get. And more now, every one of our franchises has multiple community managers that manage social networks like Twitter and Facebook. I personally encourage all of our employees, and it's a dangerous thing, to interact via those platforms, to speak about the game. Try not to get into arguments, but speak passionately, inform, help. I am a pretty heavy Twitter user over the last 4 or 5 months. Primarily, I like to talk to gamers. And I've taken it upon myself in the last 2 months to be the incoming source of complaints and interact and try and help. And we have a system with many of our community managers that I know exactly where to be able to deliver the gamer and say, you need to go help with this issue. And I do that myself, and I spend a lot of time, probably try and carve out as many as 2 hours a day now, being on social networks and being a little bit of the face of the company and interacting with gamers and trying to help them through their problems. Community management is a huge part of what we do.
So do you notice, I mean, when you're spending 2 hours doing that, it can be harmful to your ego, but also could be pretty powerful.
I've been called some things in the last few weeks, yes.
And what's the value of that? What does that do for you as an executive and then your leadership at EA when you're that connected to the gamer and to the consumer?
Look, we're a $4 billion publicly traded video game publisher. We're seen as monolithic. We've been around for 30-odd years. We have lived through, we're dinosaurs in Silicon Valley. We've lived through so many transitions, and you know, there's an interesting narrative that goes through gaming is that there's a movement away from companies like ourselves who don't have, in the eyes of some gamers, the gamers' wants and needs paramount in our strategy. Nothing could be further from the truth. And a movement towards, you know, indie game developers and mobile platforms. It's kind of my job to break that down a little bit. I enjoy speaking to gamers. I enjoy the platform that is Twitter. You do have to have a thick skin. There is some things that go on that boggles my mind that people can actually type, never mind then push tweet on the whole thing, but that comes with the territory. But we're a real-time digital company, and waiting 24 hours for an email now is no longer sufficient. And so we see Twitter in particular as a tremendous community tool that allows my teams around the world, and like I say, we've got a rhythm now where they mop up behind me, to be able to interact with our consumers within a few minutes. If I'm there and you tweet me and say, I got a problem with FIFA Ultimate Team, if I'm available, I jump right on, ask you what the problem is, and then hand you off to a specialist who hopefully can resolve your problem within 30 minutes. Community management is critical. This is not, our customers used to be retailers.
Yeah, right.
Our customers now are gamers. Retail plays a very important part in the ecosystem, but our customer is the gamer. And we have to build systems. We have to build, in particular, customer service. Now, we've got approaching 1,500 people that wear an EA badge that all they do is talk to customers. And that's a good chunk of our workforce right now. And that's probably triple what it was as recently as 5 years ago.
Well, I think that's a fantastic example of the evolution of the industry. And I'm going to touch on one more topic here with Peter, and then we're going to come to your questions, and we'll spend as much time as they'll allow us on those. And the topic here, Peter, is free-to-play. You talk about being closer to the customer. Martin alluded to it on the prior panel. You have free-to-play, just a couple of the baseline statistics. Nexon, an ESA member, reported $336 million in revenue last quarter, up 12%. Digital goods, according to Super Data, are going to be worth $20 billion by 2015. Free-to-play today is 25% of the U.S. digital market. So this is a concept that didn't exist in the United States a handful of years ago. Today, it's the highest margin, fastest growth revenue, and the notion you make money off of free is still, you have many people scratching their heads. What's EA's take on free-to-play, and what's the global opportunity?
Well, the global opportunity is actually ahead of the North American opportunity because physical media disappeared many, many years ago, in particular from the Asian market, and more recently from the Latin American market, and free-to-play phenomenon and the business model and how it all works obviously came out of that cradle, in particular the Korean and Taiwanese and the Chinese markets. Japan still had a strong physical media business, but we're seeing more with platforms like Gree and DNA. And I think it's pretty simple for us. I mean, we have an axiom at Electronic Arts. We look at three things. We look at, first of all, the size of the funnel now. When I got into this industry, if you asked me how many gamers there were in the world, this is 1999, and you asked me on 9/9/99, if everybody remembers that date, I'd say there's maybe 50, 60 million hardcore gamers that are buying consoles or playing on their PCs. Ask me today, and there could be as many as 2 billion. The barriers to entry of gaming have been broken down because of, in particular, smartphones and tablets. If you can swipe with your index finger, you're a gamer. Yep. Secondarily, the price barrier has been completely dropped down because the games are obviously free to play. And we as a company have got to be comfortable, and the industry's comfortable with, the huge majority of the people are going to pay you nothing. Mm-hmm. And they are the gawkers, And we talked about the whales. Without the gawkers, the whales don't feel like they're worth investing in content. And it's the interesting dynamic that the more people are playing, and the more people that can see what the whales do, the more money the whales will spend. There's the movement towards why would you spend on digital content that shifted away from why would you go to the movies, why would you buy music. This is what people enjoy doing. There's a competitive nature. In particular, we see games that have Facebook Connect, and a lot of the games that I play, I'm competitive, and I do like to be on Bejeweled Blitz or whatever I happen to be playing, or Iron Force at any given time, so that I can see how I compete against my friends. And it is something that allows us to be able to look at what we call acquire, engage, and then ultimately monetize. But my arms go down like that way for a reason. There's an acquisition of bringing as many people in. You break down the price barrier. You've also broken down the time barrier. You know, buying a video game was an investment, not only money, time. They were difficult to understand. You know, my first E3s, I would hand somebody a controller, a journalist, and it was like giving kryptonite to Superman because they're intimidated. It's got buttons, it's got triggers, it's got sticks. I don't want to make a fool of myself. We have, as an industry, done brilliantly, I think, over the last few years of making gaming far more accessible. Secondarily, I think the ability for us to be able to take cues from outside of the US in this particular instance, for countries like Korea, which I think is the gold standard of how this works, and we have a fabulous game, as I mentioned, which is FIFA Online 3 there, to say, look, it costs you nothing. If you like it, keep playing, and you know, eventually we'd like you to spend $1 or $2 here, but if you don't, that's just fine. Grinding is the phrase we use. But we built platforms. We have many free-to-play games. We enjoy interacting with more and more gamers who become EA gamers as a result. And either we monetize them within the game because we've engaged them and then move them down to the monetization level, or hopefully we built a relationship and we can have another game that might catch their eye. Whether it's Plants vs. Zombies, Real Racing 3, Sims Free Play, The Simpsons Tapped Out, tremendous game if you haven't played that on smartphone and tablet. Donuts, billions of donuts being bought and sold. It just has broadened what gaming is all about. This is no longer boys in their bedrooms. This is anybody that has a device that allows any kind of interaction. It's got a power button and some kind of an input device. Games are prevalent everywhere.
It really is fantastic because when you think about it, you have the huge theatrical releases that you have around Battlefield or Call of Duty or GTA 5, $1 billion in 3 days. Those types of experiences, which are very immersive. Skyrim 2 years ago, which I was talking to Robert Altman, and I said, well, you know, I kind of audit that with my son because it's 100 hours of gameplay, and he corrected me and said, it's 400. Because if you do all the side quests and you successfully complete everything, it's 400. We do that to Tapped Out, right? And The Sims and Plants vs. Zombies, and it's really a phenomenal enterprise. So let's turn to the audience. I'd love to hear, we'll get started with your questions. I have some that I have prepared for Peter that could be interesting, but let's go to yours. Anybody? Do we have microphones out here? Over here on the right? Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I know you said you don't use the term marketing anymore, but how do you see EA launching and marketing new brands and new IP that's new to consumers 3-4 years from now? Like, how are you going to get that in front of them and get that, you know, mass awareness?
Well, I was being somewhat flippant by it not being marketing, but what we need to do as a company is not spend the tens of millions of dollars that we used to do of a TV campaign that we would run during NFL kickoff season, wait 30 days, go poll retailers to see whether we'd had a lift in sales, or go track aided awareness or whatever. What we do today is we manage our community, we listen to our community, we use digital channels very effectively, and what we call performance-based marketing is de rigueur at EA today. There are teams in our Redwood Shores headquarters right now that are working on placing media to look at installs. They will review that at noon, and then we will decide whether we'll continue to invest between noon and 2 o'clock based on lifetime value calculations, the number of installs that we're seeing. And even in the big game releases, obviously we still do television, but television for me in today's world is more like blood in the water. It's chum. You attract a consumer through a TV campaign, then your job is to take them digital, to do the community management, explain the game, show clips, Give strategy guides digitally. Make sure that they understand exactly what the game's about. You can't do that with mass media or traditional media. You've got to be able to do that with digital media that allows people to engage with you rather than push a message out. And more, when I look at the mix of our media over the last 3 fiscal years, Electronic Arts, our TV spend has come down a full 20% on a global basis, and our digital engagement spend has probably doubled that as a result, and we're becoming a lot more reactive. We listen to gamers in real time. We make changes in the way that we communicate. We communicate based on questions that gamers have. The only way you can do that is digitally. So moving away, we haven't done a print ad in probably 7 or 8 years, but moving away from more traditional media and having a engagement conversation 24 hours a day with gamers. I think the Titanfall beta was a great example. We didn't spend a penny marketing that. It was more about having conversations with gamers, letting them know. I spent all day Saturday on Twitter dishing out PC codes and talking to gamers one-on-one. Come back and tweet me after you played it for a couple of hours, let me go. I ended up direct messaging because I found out that if you put a code on Twitter, bots will pick it up straight away and it's gone. So the only way I could distribute them, and this is the ultimate in community management, and my wife thinks I'm crazy, is to sit there all day Saturday, insist somebody follows me, which is the only way you can direct message them, and then send them a direct message with the code and have a conversation with them. I did probably close to 200 of those on Saturday. So, you know, that is probably taking it to the extreme, and I don't expect that of any of my fellow team members at EA, but I enjoyed doing it, and I was getting the feedback in real time from these people who, quite frankly, felt obligated to at least report back to me because I'd given them a code. So less traditional media, more digital engagement, more community management, more listening to the gamer because they have an opinion, and they deserve to be heard. They are the customer.
So offshoot of that question, then we'll go back to the audience. We do the industry statistics on the size of the market, number of industry. You have 38% of gamers now are women, and a quarter of gamers are over the age of 50. If you're not doing that marketing in the traditional sense, how do you expand the market for the industry and for EA beyond the core? What are the tools you use for that? Well,
the core know where to go. Look, there's so many great websites now that we either put just plain old marketing around. The IGNs, the GameSpots, in particular, Kotaku is a blog, and you know you can engage Joystick, Engadget. I think of these are multi-million users per day that are the tentpoles of our industry. Polygon, you know, love them or hate them, they are platforms by which I read every single day, and I go into the forums every day to get a feel for what's going on. I have to. I can't wait a week to find out what's going on. And I read all of them, particularly when it's tied to something that we're doing. To the point that some of our games we deem truly mass market. FIFA is a mass market game. Television becomes important there. Battlefield is a mass market game. But again, we will do our television advertising. In both of those instances, as much money as we invest in television, you could probably double what sits below the surface of digital engagement with bespoke websites, microsites, offshoots of the TV commercials that you can go on YouTube and look at, behind the scenes, and then our Twitter accounts on all of these things for hearing feedback become very, very important. So again, you'll see us on TV, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It is not the focal point of what we do in marketing anymore.
It's the beginning.
It is absolutely the beginning of the conversation.
Another question. We have a hand down here in the front, unless there's a microphone that's already been...
In terms of content, obviously you talked about the community engagement. Obviously that's one place to get it with the Salesforce type model, with the developers themselves of these games, players of the games, want to either change an existing game or get new content that you're aware, which obviously helps you in the overall content development process. Maybe speak to what you see there, the engagement side, how they're doing that, whether you're doing it, what portion you're doing on your own, what portion you're looking for the gamers to do. And then the second part of the question is new developments, like a 3D process or the Google Glass, or where you're going in terms of new developments, even beyond hands and clicking, eye movements, things like that, that you're looking at for the future.
So the idea of fresh content is very important. It's a great point. And there's two great examples that we use. We talked about The Simpsons Tapped Out. On pretty much monthly basis, tied into events in classic Simpsons style, whether it's Valentine's Day or Halloween, we'll push out fresh content. We are constantly, and this is a game that's 2 years old, and a mobile game, and a free-to-play game, but we're constantly giving fresh content. That keeps our user base engaged. It allows them to feel that the game is fresh all the time, rather than stagnating and going stale. And it keeps what has become a very successful game for us, a top 5 game on iOS and Android. If you go to the other side of the continuum, if you have Simpsons at one end, you have Battlefield 4 at the other end, we have a thing called Battlefield Premium. And we have teams now around the world who are focused on post-release content for the same reason. We want gamers to stay engaged with us. And again, we go back to the question of marketing. It is far easier for my teams, global marketing reports directly to me, to simply re-engage with a Battlefield 3 consumer who's still playing 2 years later and move them to migrate them to Battlefield 4, as we've done since the game shipped late October, than to reacquire them because they stopped playing. How do you keep them playing? A thing called Battlefield Premium. And this is delivering a brand new map packs, brand new expansion packs, experiences over a 12 to 14 month period that keeps that game fresh. It keeps our DAUs, our daily active users, up in the millions because they've got more reasons to play all the time. It's a large part of what we do now, and it's very different than our development process as recently as 3-4 years ago, where, again, make the game, 2 weeks off, go to the beach, rinse and repeat, go do it all over again. This is a live operations, fresh content coming through, so there's an engagement level. What was your second question, I'm sorry? Yeah. Non-traditional, yeah. We as a company, Electronic Arts, over the last 30 years of our existence, have always looked at anything that feels like if the gamer says, I want to play games on this platform or in this mode or in this manner, then we take a very serious look at it. But in the same way, my company and I are responsible for the livelihoods of 9,000 full-time employees and probably another 5,000 contract employees in various roles. We have to make very sound business decisions. So we're selective. We listen to gamers. 3D was an interesting phenomenon, but even Sony would probably say to you, you know, it really didn't take off to the level that we thought it would, even in movies, you know, maybe Avatar notwithstanding or a couple of other movies. Gravity I saw in 3D. Those are the only 2 movies I've seen in 3D. Gaming has even been less sticky, quite frankly. We're very interested in looking at new platforms. We were talking in the earlier panel about Oculus Rift, which is the virtual reality headset. I've tried it. It's a fascinating experience. It's still got some kinks that need to be worked out as regards orientation, but we keep a very close eye on that. And quite frankly, any trend that comes along, but we have to make hard calls on what our development teams have got to focus on. Sometimes we get it wrong. We came too late to the Nintendo Wii is a good example. We weren't there at the beginning, and then by the time we got there in force, that platform has already started to drop off, and we didn't get that right. And that had serious implications as regards our ability to maintain a stable workforce. So we look at platforms, we look at devices, and we listen most importantly to what gamers want. And when we feel that there's a critical mass, when we feel that there's a business opportunity to bring our content in a meaningful manner that is fun or engaging for gamers, that we do that. Right now, we've got plenty of platforms we have to worry about, but we keep a very close eye on the ones that you just discussed.
So 2 quick addendums to Peter's thought. You know, first, when you look at where this industry is relative to that engagement and the content and what's the role between the gamer and the game publisher, one of the clear symbols of that is the remote control for the PlayStation 4, which has a share button. And the notion that it will capture the last 60 seconds of gameplay and post it on a social media platform of your choice so that you can share this experience with others is a very profound symbol of where that partnership is in the creative experience in the industry. The second thing is when it comes to the new things, there's no better place to see that than at E3. June 10 to 12 this year, LACC, so just down the road.
Shameless plug.
It is. 50 billion media impressions last year off of the show. It's absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't been, you absolutely should come, and you see the very best of what Peter has to offer stacked up against what all the other companies are doing. It's fantastic. So Peter, before we came to this, I'll come back to the audience for a moment. I actually surveyed a few of your former colleagues and said, you know, I'm going to have Peter on stage, and what questions do you think I should ask him? And
I smell a rat
and,
here.
yeah, well, there's one here. And so the first one goes like this, and we'll see if you can guess who provided the question, was the Super Bowl. You're familiar
I'm familiar with the Super Bowl, yes.
and the outcome.
Yes.
And if the final score there was 43-5 or 43-8, and the victory margin was 35 over Denver, and the Patriots were beaten by Denver, what would the final score have been in the Super Bowl if the Seahawks had played the Patriots?
Well, I think the first thing that would have
Since
happened...
Peter's a Patriots fan,
yes,
just
thank
for all
you.
of you.
Just for clarification, is the first play from scrimmage wouldn't have been a safety. And an interesting little story here, just digital media again. I'm originally from England, as you can probably tell. My brother is a Liverpool policeman. I don't know if I told you this story. I am stood in the stadium. My brother texts me. He's ready to put his bets on the game, which you can do legally. And he texts me, this is literally 5 minutes before kickoff. He goes, "What's a safety?"
5 minutes before?
5 minutes before kickoff. And I said a safety is when the offense loses possession of the ball and blah, blah, and it's regained possession, blah, blah, blah. But in the end zone.
And you fit that in 140 characters.
This is a text, not a tweet. And he said, yeah, Ladbrokes are offering 50-1 that there will not be a safety in the game, or there will be a safety in the game. Should I take it? I said, put £1 on it. 50 quid. He had no idea what a safety was, but he put £1 on it. And literally, we're just sitting down, and Peyton Manning's wondering where the ball's gone. And Manny Ramirez thought he heard the snap count. And why Peyton needs to change the first play of the Super Bowl by walking forward is just beyond me. How many times can you say Omaha and not confuse the center? Anyway, I think the Patriots would have given the Seahawks a far better game. I would like to see Tom Brady and Richard Sherman go at it again.
One more time. You mad, bro? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, another question from the audience. Back here? Yeah.
First, fellow Patriots fan, go Pats. So my question is, as we look at increasing emphasis on online gaming, network infrastructure, I was surprised recently that EA announced that development and support for two of its oldest online games, Ultima and Dark Age of Camelot, was being...
You're going to have to either slow down or come forward, yeah.
So looking at increased emphasis on online games and networking, I was surprised that EA recently announced that development and support for Ultima Online and Dark Age of Camelot was being outsourced to an external studio. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the advantage is to EA of taking those responsibilities and expertise and moving them outside the company.
It's a common occurrence. We have literally hundreds of online games live at any given time. And at some point, we make a decision to, I'll call it outsource it, but to push it to a different studio so that a developer who desperately wants to do something different after a decade can move away and try and build new intellectual property. It's a lot about the ability for us to be able to keep our employees engaged, develop new IP. Ultima Online's been around, what, 15, 16 years at this point? The game was still up and running. It was easier for us to be able to keep it going that way, because one of the things that is very tough in our industry is when we sunset a game. Mm-hmm. And sometimes business says you need to eventually close a game down. There aren't enough people playing. It's costing you more money than it's bringing in. You can't afford to, quite frankly, employ your employees to be working on that game anymore. These are tough decisions. Sometimes it's easier just to push it and outsource it to maybe a country. We do a lot in Romania, we do a lot in India, where you've got a better cost efficiency there. You can keep the game up and running. You've got people who like to do new content. They haven't worked on the game before. So we make those tough decisions probably on a monthly basis. But literally, we have hundreds of games up and have to be able to make business decisions, particularly as we go into our new fiscal year planning now, of which several hundred games we keep running and making some very difficult decisions about others. The great majority of our games last for many, many years. If we do decide to actually sunset a game, we give the community tremendous amount of advance warning so that they can start easing themselves away from the game and maybe moving somewhere else.
Time for one more last quick question. We have a hand here, unless there's a microphone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Emil Muhana with Akamai Technologies. You touched on something there with your brother, right? He's a cop in gambling. Where does Electronic Arts stand with the new wave of legislation that's coming up to start allowing gambling. And I know it's New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and Nevada are starting to do some things. Just curious what the plans look like for you guys.
So let me be very clear. My policeman brother gambling, that is... Yeah, exactly. I grew up in England. I grew up in a culture that gambling is legal. The government figured after World War I, they're better off taking 10% of the gambling revenue than making it illegal. It is Ladbrokes and William Hills and Paddy Power. You've all heard of these. If you've ever been to England, you can walk to a gate. So my brother's not doing anything illegal. I want to protect his. I want to protect his badge. Sports gambling in particular, if you watch a Premier League game, you watch the LCD boards, they are changing the odds in the stadium as the game progresses. It's just something outside of the US we're very used to. So let me make that point there. Skill-based gaming is where I think we're seeing a lot of progress now as an industry. And in particular, esports, where it's not necessarily gambling, but there is prize money for great gamers that play either a sports game like a Madden or a FIFA. The fine line we have to be able to tread is our relationship with our licensors. You can imagine having a conversation which every now and again we explain to the NFL what skill-based gaming is and explain that you could be a professional Madden player, which a lot of people, and when I say a lot, several hundred people earn a living playing the Madden circuit of esports and whatever goes on in the hotel suites after that at night, that can make a living playing video games. You go outside of this country and go to countries like Korea, these are six-figure jobs playing games like StarCraft, primetime television. So again, the idea of gambling and video gaming are very strange bedfellows, and right now it's illegal. The ability for us to look at skill-based gaming, which somebody looks at the code and decides there's skill, it's not chance, there's no dice rolls in there, that is coming along. Esports is at the front end of that, and you're going to hear a lot more about this. Companies like Major League Gaming, Virgin Gaming, these companies are bringing together tens, if not hundreds of thousands of gamers in arenas, virtual arenas, to play against each other for prize money. And it's about skill. It's about, I'm better than you, and here's $10 and I'll prove it. Except in this case, there's $25,000 or $50,000 to be won. And it's a very important part. Certainly from our business, we look at it as just making the engagement levels higher. We don't necessarily get directly involved in maybe sponsoring the tournaments, but they use our content, and we think it's great for the industry because it really makes people focus on getting better at playing a particular game.
So Peter, our time is up, and I'd like to thank you for being a tremendous industry champion, for your energy, your competitive spirit, your candor here today, and let's thank Peter Moore from Electronic Arts.
Thank you. And thank you, Mike, for being a great host. Thank you.
Please go ahead.